In December 1989, Nicolae Ceausescu gave a speech that was supposed to show Romania he was still in charge. In the heart of a cold Romanian December, Nicolae Ceausescu stood on the balcony of the Central Committee building in Bucharest, looking down on what he believed to be yet another crowd assembled to worship him. For 24 years, he had ruled Romania with an iron fist, a man who transformed paranoia into policy and his own image into a cult. He had no idea the crowd gathered below was about to change his fate forever. That day, he began to speak, as always, praising socialism, denouncing enemies, promising a better tomorrow, his words echoing through loudspeakers. But something strange happened. The people didn't cheer. A low murmur began. Then came whistles. Then a roar. For the first time in decades, Ceausescu's voice was drowned out by the people. He blinked in disbelief, turned to his wife Elena, and tapped the microphone. "Hello," he muttered, stunned. "Hello." The crowd was jeering, booing, shouting for change. Television cameras kept rolling. The image of a dictator losing his grip was broadcast live across Romania. This was the beginning of the end. In the back corridors of the Central Committee building, a young soldier named Adrian Petrescu, only 22, stood nervously with his rifle slung across his shoulder. He had joined the army to serve his country, but his loyalty to Ceausescu was thin. Adrian had grown up in hunger, watching his parents trade eggs for cigarettes, and listening to foreign radio in whispers. From a crack in the hallway door, Adrian watched as the General Secretary stepped onto the balcony like an actor before his final performance. Adrian's commander, Colonel Ionescu, leaned in and muttered, "Keep your eyes sharp. There are whispers, something's shifting." Adrian nodded but remained silent. The whispers had reached him too. Protesters in Timișoara had stood against the regime just days earlier, and the regime had responded with bullets. But now Bucharest was boiling, and the fire was climbing up the walls of power. As Ceausescu stumbled through his speech, confusion growing on his face, Adrian felt something shift. A storm, but not of nature. A storm of the people. Suddenly, the massive crowd below surged. Shouts of Timișoara, "Down with Ceausescu," echoed through the square. Firecrackers went off. The secret police, the dreaded Securitate, rushed to control the situation, but it was too late. Inside the building, Elena Ceausescu turned, her voice shrill with panic. "Nicolae, they're rebelling." The old dictator stared at the crowd in disbelief. "They love me," he whispered. "They always have." What happened next was chaos. The regime collapsed with astonishing speed. Protests spread like wildfire across the nation. The army, once loyal, turned against the dictator. In a desperate attempt to flee, Ceausescu and Elena escaped by helicopter on December 22nd. But the people and the army were done with them. Captured on December 25th, they were tried and executed by firing squad in a hastily organized trial. Their final moments were grim, filmed for history and justice alike. Romania, after decades of dictatorship, had broken free in one of the most dramatic revolutions in Eastern Europe. Adrian was assigned to the unit that eventually cornered the fleeing Ceausescus in a village outside Bucharest. He didn't speak much. He simply watched, silent, as the couple, now stripped of their power, their confidence, even their arrogance, were led into captivity. When the orders came down for execution, Adrian was not part of the firing squad. But he stood there, rifle across his chest, watching as the man who once ruled with godlike authority now begged for his life. Elena shouted curses. Ceausescu recited the Internationale. The bullets ended their reign. Adrian felt no joy, only silence. Heavy, complicated silence. In the real world, Romania's path to democracy was rocky and uncertain. Corruption lingered. Power shifted hands, often from one old communist to another in disguise. But people could finally speak. Protest. Dream. Adrian returned home, changed forever. He kept his uniform, but never wore it again. He became a schoolteacher, quietly educating a new generation about truth, freedom, and the real cost of silence. Sometimes, he would walk past the square where Ceausescu gave his last speech. Now, pigeons roamed freely and children played, unaware of the history beneath their feet. And sometimes, he would pause, remembering that December day, when the people found their voice, and a dictator met his end not on a battlefield, but on a balcony, with a microphone in hand and fear in his eyes. Romania awoke to a nation without Nicolae Ceausescu. After 24 years of absolute control, the dictator was gone, executed in a military barracks on Christmas Day. His regime had vanished almost overnight, and the streets of Bucharest were filled with equal parts euphoria and uncertainty. But though the old symbols were torn down, the damage of decades could not be erased so easily. The National Salvation Front, FSN, led by Ion Iliescu, a former communist himself, stepped in to restore order and guide the transition. But many Romanians, including those who had risked their lives protesting, saw familiar faces in these new leaders. Were they really free? Or had one mask simply replaced another? The revolution had toppled the tyrant. But the question lingered. Would the system truly change? Adrian Petrescu arrived back in his hometown of Pitești on December 29, 1989. The streets were still scarred from clashes, the walls tagged with graffiti reading Libertate and Jos Ceausescu. Down with Ceausescu. His family's apartment, cold and dark, had not seen power in 2 days. The lines for bread still stretched around the corner. His mother, Doina, wept when she saw him, not just from joy, but from exhaustion. "You made it," she whispered, hugging him tightly. They said soldiers were being shot in the streets. Adrian didn't respond. He stared at the flickering candle in the kitchen, listening to the silence of a home that had survived years of fear, rationing, and lies. In early 1990, the FSN declared itself a political party and announced elections. But demonstrations resumed, this time against the new rulers, who many believed were just rebranded communists. Students and intellectuals gathered in University Square in Bucharest, launching a peaceful protest called the Goleniad. They wanted true reform, a complete break from the past. But in June 1990, Iliescu, Romania's new president, invited miners from the Geo Valley to restore order. Thousands of miners flooded Bucharest, attacking protesters, journalists, and opposition party offices. The incident, known as the Mineriads, shocked the world. Blood returned to the streets of Bucharest, this time under a new government's watch. Adrian watched the news with disbelief. Students beaten, opposition crushed. The faces may have changed, but the tactics remained. He was invited by an old comrade to join the SRI, the new Romanian intelligence service, a rebranded Securitate. He declined. Instead, Adrian began volunteering at a local school, teaching history, the real history, not the state version he was forced to recite growing up. One day, he brought in a dusty, battered television and played a grainy VHS tape of Ceausescu's final speech. "This," he said, pausing the tape as the crowd began to shout back, "was the sound of a nation waking up." A 14-year-old student raised her hand. "And what happened after we woke up?" Adrian hesitated. "Some of us went back to sleep. Others are still fighting to stay awake." Throughout the 1990s, Romania struggled to rebuild. Corruption was rampant. Infrastructure crumbled. The economy teetered between reform and collapse. Yet something had changed, irrevocably. The people had tasted rebellion. And though many lost hope, others began building the foundations of civil society. In 2007, Romania officially joined the European Union, a symbolic milestone, but not a perfect one. The EU welcomed Romania with cautious optimism, demanding reforms, transparency, and human rights improvements. The ghosts of Ceausescu's regime still lingered, but the people, journalists, artists, students, carried the torch of truth. By the early 2000s, Adrian was a father. His daughter, Irina, had never seen a food line. She had never whispered in fear, never bowed before a dictator's portrait. Adrian told her stories sometimes. Of the balcony, of the helicopter, of the eyes of a man who once ruled the country like a god, now reduced to a fugitive with nowhere left to run. He often sat by the window, smoking, watching the children play in the same streets where tanks once rolled. He kept one photo on his wall, not of Ceausescu, not of the revolution,